Welcome to the Own It Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Own It Powercast, the place to come to get what you need to move yourself forward. Hey, it's Mary Baker and welcome to episode 167. Letting go of your need to control your teenager is the greatest gift you can give them. So this episode is actually my interview with Jim White, who is an author, coach, and founder of the Family Enrichment Academy. Jim has spent the past 40 years studying the topics of personal development, marriage, and parenting. And more importantly, he says he's also spent those 40 years applying these lessons and living his life as a husband, a father to 6 children, and a grandfather. His great new book, How to Be the Parent Your Teenager Needs You to Be, without all of the fighting, frustration, or fear of doing it wrong, is now available on Amazon, and I strongly encourage you guys to check it out. So I sought out Jim because many clients that I work with have teenagers and are struggling with how to find the healthiest ways to engage with them. And they also, after doing a lot of their own personal growth work, want the best for their kids. And they want to empower their teenagers and not control them. And that's what Jim and I are going to get into today. And so without further ado, here's my interview with Jim White. Well, welcome, Jim. I was really excited to have you on the show because of the work that you do and the service that you bring to families, especially families with teenagers.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. Looking forward to having a little conversation.
Yeah, because I think that, especially on my show, we talk about a lot about empowerment and a lot about owning who you are and a lot about finding out who you are and how adolescence is supposed to be where we start that journey and probably don't finish it till we're almost 30 if we're lucky, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
If we do. So just let us know a little bit about you, your journey to this work, what's brought you here, and kind of your story, if you could.
I'll give you a little backstory of how I ended up with the Family Enrichment Academy. So, and actually, believe it or not, it's hard for me to imagine. It all started like 40 years ago for me. I've been a student of personal development, marriage, and parenting for those 40 years. But more importantly, I've been living my life and applying the lessons learned as a father and a husband and a father of 6 children over those 40 years as well.
Wow.
And actually, this is where I like to share the idea of a hero's 2 journeys. I like to think of my life as sort of a classic example of the hero's 2 journeys, which if your audience is not familiar, it's a storytelling technique that they use in movies and books. And the premise is that the main character or the hero in the story is on 2 different journeys. They always are trying to accomplish a task or a goal or a mission, they're trying to get somewhere. And that's known as the outside journey or the first journey. And they encounter obstacles that get in their way, but they move towards that goal, whatever it might be. But then they also are experiencing a second journey, which is more of an internal transformation. And if you think about any of the great movies or books that you've ever watched, you'll realize that hero was going through this internal transformation as they were pursuing that outside goal. And they're becoming a better person. They're learning things about themselves, different principles, values, and beliefs to lead by that just make things work better for them typically. And that's really what makes the story compelling, is that second journey. So how this relates to me and my life as a parent, and actually I present this to all the parents I work with, is that we are on 2 different journeys. As a parent, there's a lot of stuff for us to do, right? And with 6 kids, we had places to go, dinners to make, homework to help with. There was a lot of stuff to do. And on top of that, we had obstacles to overcome as well. Everything from a forgotten homework assignment to one of our children actually struggled with some learning disabilities. And then everything from a bump or a bruise on the knee to one of our kids struggling a little bit with drugs and alcohol. And as you can imagine, being married for 40 years, it wasn't all just bright, sunshiny days as well. I mean, we had our share of cloudy days as we went through those 40 years of marriage. So we had a lot of obstacles to overcome. But interestingly, as I was going through those 40 years, I was also experiencing this internal transformation as well. And it was sort of through my passion for personal development, marriage, and parenting. I was just discovering and learning new principles, values, and beliefs that just made our family work better all along. And actually, one of the things that happened about 20 years ago, I started writing a little bit more, almost like journaling. And I actually put together a book about 20 years ago. I found that was a great way for me to process information as I would learn information. And at that time, I wrote, in effect, a vision statement for our family was part of that process. And, and in my vision statement and our vision statement, it talked about, treating each other with respect, honoring differences, empowering each other. We talked about being able to enjoy the good times, but at the same time, be able to effectively deal with difficult circumstances that may come our way. And then the final line was that our home would be full of peace, joy, warmth, and love. And so that was sort of the definition, if you will, of what success was. And part of the process is, though, to acknowledge that a lot of times there's a gap from where you are and whatever that ideal is. And so you're not there all the time. And my family certainly wasn't there all the time. But as time went on, we were there more often than not. And then the other piece of it was, something happened, a new circumstance that sort of, if you will, knocked us off our game a little bit. I was really comfortable and felt like I knew how to lead us back to that ideal. And so again, 40 years worth of time doing that. And where I find myself now, our youngest child is actually off in college. And this really started to percolate up for me just pre-COVID. So 2 or 3 years ago now, it's like I feel called to share some of the wisdom and the lessons learned over those 40 years. And I should say part of my sort of interest in personal development, what have you, I actually went through a coaching program several years ago as well, like a certified life coach. So that was part of my own development, but then obviously using those skills with our kids and what have you as well. So anyway, I find myself at this point in my life where I feel called to share some of that wisdom. And so I formed the Family Enrichment Academy as a vehicle to do that. I've written another book. It's really focused for parents with teenagers. And that's kind of focusing my effort right now with parents with teenagers. But anyway, the book is part of the effort to share knowledge, and I do coaching and programs is all part of that calling to share some of the wisdom gained. So that's a 40-year journey in 5 minutes or something like that.
Right.
So.
Wow. And I love the bought and paid for journey that you can help now walk other people, right? As you have walked and share everything that you've learned along the way. And I just think that especially parents of teenagers are struggling. And they're always asking me about resources or help or how should I handle this, Mary? It can be a very difficult time to work with kids if the kids are struggling too. Right. Other environmental things are going on as well. And so, but I also now working with adults, I started out working with teenagers in the field, working with adults, realizing that those formative years are so important and their relationship to themselves and with their parents is so profound.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. What happens is that child grows from childhood into those teen years, and it starts when they're preteen, let's say 11, 12, moving there, is the relationship needs to transition. I like to use the distinction between control and empowerment. Mm-hmm. When they're younger, the parent tends to control what's going on. They set the schedule, they decide what happens when and where, and, they control things. But as that child grows into those teen years, there needs to be this natural transition to the parent taking on the role of more empowerment, letting go of the need to control and starting to shift to trying to empower the teen so that they can start to develop for themselves as an independent person, which is it's just a natural process that child needs to go through, because at some point they got to go off on their own, right? They're going to get launched out into the world. And part of those formative teen years are when they really sort of test the waters and start to take on their own individual image, if you will. And part of that parent's role then is shifting to empower them, to help them to develop and grow so that they're ready to then launch out into the world. And that's a struggle. That's where most of that conflict comes, because the parent is having a tough time letting go of control.
Right.
They still want to be in control of everything. And the teen is wanting to control. And so naturally there's a conflict there. So, and it's interesting in the book, one of the things I'll throw out, I introduced this idea of a readiness gap. And what it is I share the thought that the parent is always going to underestimate the teen's ability to take on responsibility. But at the same time, the teen always overestimates their ability to take on responsibility.
Right.
And so you got this gap between the two where, one's underestimating, one's overestimating. And part of the process is trying to close that gap so that you both are on the same page. But that's where a lot of the conflict comes in, is because there's that gap between what they perceive about each other.
Exactly. And that's got to stir up control issues in the parents, because they're afraid that their, let's say, 16-year-old son thinks he drives really well and can handle any situation on the road. And the parents are like, oh, no, you don't, because you haven't been driving as long as I have, and that kind of thing. So how do you help parents in those moments not react out of fear?
It's a challenge. And I'll just say, and that's part of the journey. I mentioned, and that, again, I share with the parents, you're on a journey and you're growing and learning as you go through as well. And so it's not like you just get it one day and all of a sudden you're there. You have to continue to grow and learn. And there's new circumstances that come up. You talked about driving. When the child turns 16, all of a sudden here's this whole new issue that we never dealt with before, which was putting the kid in the car and sending them off to school or to wherever they're going to go. And part of one of my kind of the first fundamental I like to work with parents, and you mentioned fear. Whenever the parent is fear-based, that's when there tends to be a breakdown in the connection with the teen, and things just don't work as well. And so one of the items I encourage parents to think about is start to recognize it's like self-awareness. What is it that you start to experience when you're in that fearful place? Is it worry? Is it frustration? Is it anger? Is it, as you start to notice, and it's really about self-awareness. When you notice yourself getting frustrated, catch yourself and then try to create a little bit of a pause. That's part of the coaching process. And if you need to go take a walk, do that. Or if you need to take a few deep breaths, whatever it is, to try to create a little bit of a pause and let that negative energy dissipate so that you can then try to shift your mindset. Is really the next step, is how do we shift that mindset? And I like throw out to people the idea that we really have two competing mindsets that reside within us. And all of us have this. One of them is fear-based and one of them is love-based. And in any given moment, one of those two is going to be sort of your primary way of engaging. And fundamentally, at its core, the more we engage from fear, the more damage we do and the more pain and suffering that's out there. And if we can shift over and engage from a love-based mindset, it tends to heal relationships and build relationships. And we experience more, joy and purpose and fulfillment over here. So part of that process of being aware and catching yourself, like say, if you're feeling disappointed, anger, create a pause, and then let's see if we can shift to more of a love-based mindset. And actually, I share 3 questions that, if a parent can create a pause, I like to have them. The first one is, who or what do I need to forgive? It's kind of like I need to let go of some negative judgment here. And then the second question is, what am I grateful for? And see if you can start, enter into more of a gratitude mindset. And as you get there, then the third question is, okay, what can I do to make a difference here? What's one step I can do to move this forward? But you ask that question once you're more grounded from a love-based mindset. So that's the first part of the process.
That's brilliant. And because you're right, fear is going to drive out love, or love's going to drive out fear. And fear-based responses also, unfortunately, create the undesired, unintended net effect in your teenager that they can't do it. Right, that we're doubting them, or we're giving them some kind of meta message that they're just not good enough, or the other thing that's really cool about that is moving from the reptilian brain, the fight or flight, to the prefrontal, the pause, and the gratitude is telling the amygdala, it's cool, go back to bed, we're good, everything's fine, right? So then we can actually respond rationally to our kid and think
Right.
about, like you said, the mindset. What do I want for my teenager? Well, I want them to be a confident driver. I want them to have confidence. I want them to believe in themselves. Well, I
Right.
can't do that while I'm sitting here telling them at the same time, you don't know what you're talking about, right?
Right. Right. It's and the other thing I like to point out to parents is, if you respond from that fearful mindset and you respond that way, you don't know what you're doing. The child is going to get defensive and they're actually going to start to experience some frustration or anger or whatever. And one of the things I like to share is you can't influence or empower or teach that child when they're caught up in that negative emotion. The only job of the parent, you need to be aware and recognize when your child is there. If you notice them having that negative energy there, the only job of the parent at that moment is to be a safe place for that negative energy to dissipate. That's the first thing. You got to let that energy dissipate, because until it's gone, you can't move forward anyway, right? And so you just got to be aware, and you got to be able to recognize when that the child's there. And then that's where you got to be love-based, to have some compassion at that point. Is how can I be compassionate here? How can I be forgiving? And just be with them and let that negative energy dissipate. And then it could be an hour later or tomorrow, whenever, then you can move into the coaching role and trying to empower them to be a better driver in our example. But you got to let that negative energy go away first. And what you were saying, if the parents got the negative energy, if you think about it, it just feeds off each other. That sends it to the child, and the child sends it back to me, and it just sort of escalates, and everything, kind of gets out of proportion then. And so part of the role of the parent is to be for lack of a better word, the adult, if you will, that can say, okay, we're going to create a pause here and try to let that dissipate so that we can then move forward in helping to develop the child in some way, whatever the circumstance is.
Right. Because if we are focusing on developing self-esteem, which I think if you help them do that, they'll make better decisions.
Absolutely.
A teenager with better self-esteem doesn't want to be self-destructive. They want to be seen as responsible. They may want to try out a few things that aren't so great, but for the most part, what they've told me when I worked with teenagers is, I want to be proud of myself and I want to make mom and dad proud of me.
Right. And they do. And it's almost interesting if mom and dad control things and protect them from consequences and being responsible. They just act real irresponsible because they figure, well, somebody will take care of it. But as soon as you turn it over to them, and actually I've had this conversation a lot around grades. Parents will say, how do I get my kid to try harder in school? Well, part of it is turning it over to them and say, you know what, these are your grades. You're old enough now. You can take care of it. It's on you now. And literally having that conversation and shifting the responsibility to the teenager. And sometimes the teen will say, wait a minute, are you saying this is for up to me now? And so they start to take it on. And you, as a parent, you're saying, oh, I'm still here to support you. It's not like I'm abandoning them, but at the same time, I'm turning that over to them. And then the key is 3 weeks later, when you find out about the missing homework assignment or the bad test grade comes home, the parent has to really resist the urge to jump back in and control or fix the problem, right? You have compassion. You say, well, that's kind of a bummer for you. What are you going to do about it? That's where you kind of move into some coaching skills. What's your plan to make this work better next time? Or how could you change your study habit? You ask them the questions, let them formulate a plan. What you're doing there is you're helping them to become resourceful. They start to learn that they can figure things out on their own with a little bit of support from the parent.
That's really great. Yeah. And so, but here's where, Jim, that parents ask me, but then, Mary, should I have consequences if they start to really bomb out in school, not doing well? Then what? What do I do then? Do you hear that often from parents, that kind
Sometimes,
of question?
and yeah, because the parent worries about that. And that's a fearful response. When you think about it, they're afraid that they're not going to accomplish it. And so here's what I would throw out. That child, as you said, a lot of times they say they want to do a good job. They want to be proud of their work. And you turn it over to them and they're still struggling. You probably got bigger issues going on, bigger than school. And so, and I've encouraged parents sometimes to say, it seems like your grades are in trouble. I'm not so much worried about the grades. I'm more worried about you. What's,
I like
where
that.
are you at? And because we have to then focus back on them. And actually, one of the other things I'd like to share with parents is this idea that all bad or unwanted behavior is really just a call for love. It's a call for your child to reconnect. And 9 times out of 10, when they're struggling like that, it's because they're feeling isolated. They're feeling not good enough. All that stuff that you had mentioned, they're feeling sort of on an island. And the first step for the parent is to rebuild that connection so that they know that home is a safe place. Home is a place where they're loved unconditionally. That's what starts to build that self-image back up and lets them reconnect with the pride and their desire to go out and do their best. In whatever it is that they're doing. But it all starts with feeling that connection at home. And so if it's really a struggle there, point back to how can I build and solidify that connection at home? Start there. That's the first step.
Like Covey's first things first, building relationship first, going back to the relationship. I agree with you. Typically what happens with these kids is there are deeper issues going on. There's some undiagnosed depression. There's often substance abuse, right?
Yep. Could be.
Getting high every day. And so they're not in a clear state of mind to really want to do best for themselves. So they do become deeper issues. And I agree with you. Even my cats act out if they don't get the attention that they need. So it is a call for love. I love that.
And those, what you described, really the core is that connection. And, if you think about that stuff comes on because they feel isolated and alone and not cared, and if you can rebuild that connection, and it's interesting, one of the other complaints I hear a lot of times from parents of teenagers is they start to feel disconnected from the teen, right? They feel like the teen's drifting away from them, and they are in effect. So the parent has to be very intentional about maintaining and building and developing that connection, because it's different than when they're young. I mean, it is a little bit of a different relationship, and so you have to be intentional about it and work on doing it, and find those opportunities. So there's almost like 2 aspects to it. You can be proactive and try to build in opportunities to build connection, but then in just your everyday engagements, there's opportunities to build connection if you come from that love-based mindset. I'll throw out an example that I think is helpful. So the teenager, let's say they always arrive home, whether they're driving or on the bus or whatever, they show up at home at 4:15 every day. And being intentional, what I'm talking about is the parent, mom, dad, whoever's there, if there's somebody at home that's in the house when they see the child, it's a transition when you think about it. And so have the parent at 10 after 4 set an alarm on their phone, and the alarm says, how do I want this first 15 minutes with my child to go? Right.
Wow. Yeah.
And so you stop for a minute, create a pause, you regroup, and you think, what is my intention in this first 15 minutes? And how can I build connection, build relationship? And so you sort of prepare yourself. Again, that's being very intentional about, okay, how can I make this work? Same thing, maybe the child does after school activities. And so it's a pickup, mom or dad picks them up in the car. And so you got a 15-minute car ride. As you pull up to pick them up, stop. How do I want this car ride to go? What's my intention? Where is my mind? How can I, let go of the need to control, just be with them, be present, whatever the thought process is. But that's an example of being intentional and creating an opportunity to build connection in an everyday type of an event, a car ride, the child coming home from school, sending them off to school. It's whenever you have these transitions, those are usually times where you can be a little intentional. And that's different than, let's say, and I like to use the example of another great way to build connection is a shared experience. But that's more of something where you have to sort of plan for it. Let's say the child is interested in cooking. Sign up for a cooking class together. And so you got 8 weeks. Every Tuesday night, you go to cooking class together. That's a shared experience. Again, you have to plan those a little bit more. So that's what I'm saying. There's you can plan some neat stuff to do, but you can also take advantage of everyday happenings as long as you're intentional about it.
Oh, yeah. And what is it? When they come to you, drop everything. Because a lot of times
Yeah, very aware of when they're ready to talk. Because they, if you say, and this happens all the time, mom or dad will say, I ask them how their day was, and all they do is say fine.
Right.
Which that's, they're just not ready to talk. But then what will happen at 11 o'clock at night,
Yep.
they'll walk in and and they won't just say, hey, can I talk?
Mm-mm.
I use actually an example in the book. I have my youngest daughter, she would wait tables in high school. And one night she came home, it's 11 o'clock, and she sat down, she had some food she brought home with her, and I happened to be in the kitchen. And it wasn't like, hey, Dad, can we talk? I think what she said was, sometimes people can be so difficult. That was her statement. And that was the opening. And so naturally, the question is, well, what do you mean people can be so difficult? And as soon as I said that, she launched into 20 minutes of talking. And it was a matter of me recognizing that opportunity and then asking for more about what was going on.
Wow.
And, and it's just then when that starts, and here's the other thing, she starts telling me how people can be so difficult. Again, she's waiting tables. At that moment, it's not my job to fix it, right?
Very important.
I need to be present,
Yep.
be compassionate, and just let that go a little bit. And that, that builds connection when you can do those things. And it makes the child, we talk about people want to be heard. Mm-hmm. That's an example of being able to be heard. And so that creates connection. And the stronger that home connection, they take that with them when they go out into the world, because they always know they can come back home. So that's why it's just so important to build that connection with mom and dad. Because, you talk about building, friends, for example, they go out, let's say they have a little rejection or something happens at school where they feel a little bit of rejection there. If they got a strong home base, they can weather that storm, if you will. They know I'm still okay.
Right.
That's, I can get over that. Whereas if they don't have that strong connection at home, when a little rejection happens at school, it's crushing to them. I mean, it just destroys them because that's all they have.
Right.
And they feel more isolated. So, but being present is one of the keys to building connection.
That is so, so true. And the research completely backs that up, right? We know that kids who struggled, adolescents with suicide, things like that, it was the double whammy. It was not feeling heard or loved or accepted at home or listened to, and then that being replicated at school. And speaking of replication, they'll replicate the relationship they have with us, whether they realize it or not, right?
Right.
They're going to go out. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I use the idea that home, when you build that strong connection, becomes a point of reference for them to compare their other relationships with.
Right.
And because I've had moms or dads say, you know what, my son's got a new girlfriend. I don't really like her. I know you probably heard that too, where mom and dad are passing judgment on the girlfriend. Well, my point is, if you build a strong, loving foundation at home, they know what love feels like.
Right.
And so when they go off and have that relationship, now it may take them 3 months to figure it out, that maybe that's not a good relationship for them, but there's value in them figuring that out for themselves.
Yeah. Because
they learn and grow. Okay, we recognize what a bad relationship looks like or feels like, but they are comparing it to what they experience at home. And so you got to create that point of reference for them to compare those other relationships to.
Well said. Well said. And speaking of that, I think that at the dinner table, most parents, including me, could have done a better job of saying, well, what do you think about that to the teenager? Or how would you solve that problem? Right. Or that's a really great idea.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I like to encourage parents to not think about results and think about process.
Process.
It's not like, what score did you get on the test, which is a results question. It's, was it a fair test, which allows them to process and share their opinion and what they think a little bit, which is really and it's great practice for them to formulate an opinion and a thought and a belief about something. So, it's trying to focus more on process than the results. And that helps the teen to open up a little bit. And to your comment, you said, well, we always, we didn't do as good as we could have. Well, that's true for everybody. I mean, that just as part of the journey, right?
It is.
You continue to grow and learn, and hopefully next time you're in a better place and you can respond. Tomorrow's dinner is always an opportunity.
Isn't that great?
To grow and be different. Tomorrow's a new day.
Every 5 minutes we get a new chance. Yeah. So
exactly.
And we can still do that. We can still, if we didn't before, we can, what I call building self-trust for them. Because we're mirroring back that we think they make sense and they're smart and they're creative.
Right.
And they're resilient and they're strong and they'll figure it out, right?
Yep.
In their own way. But that they will internalize that as self-trust, right? Because we're letting them know, we really admire them as a human.
Yeah.
We believe in them and they can trust themselves.
Right. And what's interesting is by modeling that to them, not only do they develop that self-trust, but when they go engage with other people, they're going to be that way.
Right.
They're going to be that good friend that is open and curious and all those sort of things, which means they're going to develop quality friendships out in the world as well. So you model that with them. What does it mean to build a relationship and develop, that kind of a connection? And then they go out into the world and do it again. So it's like twofold. Not only does it build for them, but it also sets the example for them to go out and engage with others.
That's so true. And so what a ripple effect that creates.
Absolutely. Which, I always like to encourage. We encourage our children, and I encourage parents to let them know that they can make a difference. I mean, if you have a friend that's struggling, you can be that person that makes a difference for them.
Right.
And that is very empowering and fulfilling. I mean, we all want to be able to do that. And so it's a way, like I say, of acknowledging and validating for the child that you have what it takes. You can help somebody else. And it's very purposeful then.
That's great. Good stuff. So tell me about how you work with parents. What is your process? How do you go about doing that so that people who are listening can know how to reach out to you for help?
Yeah. So a lot of one-on-one coaching with parents is the core of what I do. And it's really, and like I say, I put together a book, and there's the three fundamentals that we work on. And then you sort of customize it to whatever the circumstance is within the family. But the three core fundamentals, the first one we talked about is that parent and them really working to recognize, be aware of when they're fear-based and when they're love-based, and how can I shift? And, that practice for the parent of them being more aware and being able to choose and be intentional. So that's step one. And then we build off of that. The second fundamentals are around how do you build connection with your team? What are the strategies you're going to put into play? How can you do it? Solidify and build that connection. And it's interesting, you can't do that if you're not coming from a love-based mindset, right? So that's how they build on each other. And then the third fundamental is around empowerment. Once you've got that connection, now you're in a position where you can empower, influence the team. So how does that work? What do you do? And really, as you know, a lot of that's around asking better questions and releasing that need to control everything. And so those are the three fundamentals: the parent's mindset, building connection, and then learning to empower. So in a one-on-one coaching scenario, it's okay. We take the individual family circumstance and the personalities and the dynamic, and we start to introduce and try different of these strategies and work with them over, say, 3 months or so to see if they can implement and start to transform what's going on within their home. So that's, the first place. And then along with that, I have a subscription or like a membership site. It's really more of a resource for people to connect with. And I do like a on-call, if you will, or coaches. It's like a office hours. I'm just available on Monday nights. If anybody wants to jump on, ask a question, it's more of like and there could be more than one person on at that point. So it's more like a group kind of a setting. And then there's other resources in the community where people can engage and what have you there as well. So, and then I've been working on, like, I've got a course. It's a social media and your teenagers, more like a short couple hour little course. So I'm in process developing some of those. And a lot of that's based off the kinds of questions and the engagements that I get as I coach with people. So, but that's how I work with clients. Like you do a podcast. I have a YouTube channel. I produce videos. I try to do weekly content there.
Oh, cool.
Just a short video so people can connect there. And as far as connecting, one of the other sort of resource. That's a free resource I have for people. And we talked a little bit about, it's about asking better questions, because that's one of the keys to building connections. So I've got this list of 10 questions you should never ask your teenager. They're like conversation killers. And then I've got 10 great questions, and we already kind of hit on it. It's the results questions versus the process oriented questions. And that's really kind of the distinction between the two. But so if people want to go to the website, you can download that list of 10 great questions and 10 questions you should never ask as well.
Oh, that's a great resource. Wow. So if I'm a parent, how do I know I'm ready to work with you? Like, because my question here as a clinician, I'm thinking, okay, there's going to be some stuff being stirred up in mom and or dad, right? About letting go of control. And, what if they were never empowered growing up? So what do you want to let us know around that? Like, if I was going to come to you, what would I might need to work on first, maybe? Or do I just learn that through your process? Or
it's because the parent is going to have to grow and learn a little bit, obviously. Right. And it's the old classic, if you keep doing the same thing you've always been doing, you're going to get the same results. So it's kind of like when you decide to lose weight, people talk about losing weight all the time, but until they're really committed and ready, it's not going to happen.
Right.
And they may start and stop and start and stop. So it's sort of the same with this process. I mean, if a parent, if you feel like you've gotten to the point to where it's okay, I've got to do something, that's when you're really ready to move forward. And you have to be able to acknowledge that and kind of put yourself into more of a growth mindset, right? It's time for me to grow and learn. And actually, and you may have run into this too, sometimes there's a difference of opinion, if you will, between the husband and the wife, or the mom and the dad. Mom's ready to grow, but dad's not, or dad's ready and mom's not. And to be honest, sometimes I'll work with one parent because, if you can start to get a little momentum, it's all about, I don't know if you're a fan of Tony Robbins, but he talks about momentum a lot. If you can just start taking 1 or 2 steps forward, and create a little momentum, and then things will start to build from there. So, but your question was, how does somebody know when they're ready? You have to be ready to open up and try to step into the possibility. I mean, we can create a vision of what it would, what do you want your family to look like? But in order to get there, you got to be ready to I can't step in for you. You're the one that has to step into that possibility. And my role is to help coach you and guide you into that. And again, it's going to be a lot of self-reflection for the parent and their mindset. It's going to be a lot of building connection strategies and a lot of empowerment strategies. And that's, those are, I say, the fundamentals. But none of it works if the parent's not ready to step into the possibility of what can be in their family. And it's just, there's no doubt in my mind, you can heal and transform your family when you're ready to step into it. I mean, it can be done because love has an amazing ability to heal.
It does.
But you got to get there and let it do its thing.
And it is up to the people in the home who have actual power to create change.
Right. And that's, I was going to say, that's why I like to talk about the hero. You have to become the hero in the family, and you're going to take a stand for love within the family. And sometimes it's one person doing that, but if that one person, takes on that role of being the hero and taking a stand, they can start to transform the family.
That brings so much hope, doesn't it? And it's so true.
Yeah,
and I think,
absolutely.
And I think that as many adult clients over the years, and even some teenagers that I saw years later after I worked with them, they would all tell me the same thing, that they would say, Mary, it wasn't so much like the workshop or the content of the group or whatever. It's that I felt accepted. I never felt judged. And then I felt enough self-love eventually to do the work I needed to do.
Right. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think there is an order of business to things. And I think that's what you're speaking about here too, essentially.
Right.
Is allowing the teenager to feel loved and accepted and heard and valued.
Right.
And unless they're a sociopath, right? I mean, come on, they're going to want to feel better, do better, have better for themselves. I mean, I think that you're right. It's innate. They're going to want to do that. I mean, I think Maslow is right. Most of us really want to self-actualize, right?
Right. Right. And I have to say that from a love-based mindset, one of the beliefs, and I firmly believe this, is that people are fundamentally good.
Yes.
And so when I approach somebody, if they're not acting that way, it's not because they're not good. It's something's in the way, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a matter of, can you connect with that? And if you go around it, if you will, and connect with the goodness that resides within them, it helps to pull it out. And then they start to express that goodness that resides within them. And so you have to approach it with that mindset that they are fundamentally good. And it's the same thing for the parent. The parent has to believe that about themselves. They're fundamentally good.
Right.
And that's part of what, you got to try to connect with a little bit and help pull that out for the parent as well. And then they model it for the teenager.
Wow. So profound. That's so true.
Yeah.
So how can folks find you, Jim? How do they reach you?
So the website is familyenrichmentacademy.com. So they can go there. My email's on there, but just for your listeners, it's Jim, first name Jim, at familyenrichmentacademy.com. Those are the best ways to connect initially. Yeah, and just check it out. I'd love to connect and ask, be able to help where I can. That's the key.
Well, I'm just so excited that you're here and providing such a needed resource. Again, I'm just one person, and all the clients that I talk to who have teenagers are pulling their hair out, struggling, and they're looking for resources, to help them become better parents. And I work primarily with adults now. As they grow, invariably they look at me and say, oh my God, what have I done to my kids, right? Before I got healthier. Now I really want to become a better parent. It's like they organically turn towards really wanting to, be healthier there too, which is wonderful. But they need resources. So
right.
I'm just really excited that you're here to help these folks.
Yeah. And if I could leave them with one thought, those folks, is that the hope that love provides because it heals everything. I don't care how far gone things are or where you're at. I mean, you could have a child that's 30 years old and you can still heal that relationship and bring love back to it. And it'll be awesome going forward. I mean, it's never too late.
Never too late. Thank you for that. And thank you for being here, Jim. And I look forward to having you on the show again in the future.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Well, thank you, Jim, so much for that wonderful conversation. I think it gave us some really good insights into how best to empower our teenagers to trust their thinking, believe in themselves, and believe that we love them unconditionally. And my work for many years with adults and teenagers, I can tell you that it was true that when they felt accepted and loved and challenged, they tapped into some amazing resources to take care of themselves. Please check out Jim. If you have teenagers, if you have friends who have teenagers, pass this podcast along and send them to familyenrichmentacademy.com. I'll have Jim's information all in the show notes as well at ownitpowercast.com. Check him out if you want some great parent coaching. Okay, so thank you for hanging out with us today. I hope you got some great information and that you can pass it along as well to folks who also may benefit. All right, so pay it forward. Keep focusing on you, and I'll see you next time.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you can begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now, so you can really own it later.